Wilson Jr. touchdown. Marvelous Marv.
Ball next to the end zone, dropped down for Franklin. Oh, majestic touchdown.
This is Chasing the Natty, a college fantasy football podcast. Welcome in, everybody, to a special edition of Chasing the Natty, a college fantasy football podcast. I am, as always, your host, Jared Palmgren. Last year, I began what was known as the Way Too Early CFF Mock Draft Special, and it was a resounding success. So, of course, we're running it back again this year. Today, we'll be running through the first Way Too Early mock draft for CFF 2023, pretty much the best way that we can kick off the 2023 CFF season. Much about last year's special has remained the same, but I am going to run down through everything that you need to know before we get started. In this special, we're going to have 12 different college fantasy analysts in this draft, and each one of them is going to talk about their teams and their experiences/lessons from this draft. Before each pick, I'll briefly introduce each expert, and then they'll take their turn answering a series of questions that I've laid out for them, as well as bringing their own analysis to the table. So you'll be hearing from 12 different points of view of this draft, as well as where things might be standing in CFF heading into 2023, all in one special. I want to thank each of these experts, and I'll make sure to thank them individually once they finish their segments. This draft and special would not be possible without them dedicating their time and effort to providing you guys the best analysis. Also, this special will not be the only analysis we will be providing for this draft. If you wish to see the full draft board, please go to my Twitter at CFF_Jared, and you'll find a post with the full draft board there. In addition, a second CTN episode will be released the next week with myself and Nate Marquise, where we'll be analyzing the draft round by round. Please make sure to check that one out as well. Finally, if this is your first time coming to the Chasing the Natty channel, I hope you guys stick around, and you can make sure to you can do that by clicking on the subscribe button and that notification bell. In addition, please leave comments down below on anything regarding this draft. Finally, if you are listening to the podcast version of this special, please make sure you're following us on whatever platform you're listening to, and that you leave those wonderful, wonderful 5-star reviews. Now, before we begin, let me go over the format of the draft as well as roster requirements. The draft was made up of 12 different analysts and was conducted in a snake order. The order was determined by random chance. The draft contains only 9 rounds as it is early in the offseason, and most of the rankings haven't been finalized enough for us to go deeper than really that yet. The roster was also made up of 9 starting roster spots. Each team by the end contained 2 QBs, 2 running backs, 3 wide receivers, 1 tight end, and then 1 flex option being a running back, wide receiver, or tight end. No bench players were considered here. And with that, you guys pretty much have everything you need to know in order to understand what is going on in this upcoming special, so let's get right on to it. Up first, we'll be starting off with a bang as Eric Froton from NBC Sports Edge has the number 1 overall pick and comes to us live from one of college football's most iconic locations. You can find him on Twitter at CFF Froton, or CF Froton, excuse me. Go ahead and take it away, Froton.
Hi, I'm Eric Froton with NBC Sports Edge, and I'm here from the Rose Bowl in Pasadena, California, where my number 1 overall pick in the 2023 Way Too Early CFF mock draft, Caleb Williams, defeated the crosstown rival UCLA Bruins 48-45 on November 19th. Now, I've returned to the scene of that epic performance because we have the NFLPA Bowl going on. But even though we're transitioning from last year's class to 2023, that doesn't mean we can't sit here and talk about college fantasy football, and I'm going to. So let me answer these questions from Mr. Jared, shall we? What is my general opinion of this year's pool of players? Anything unique compared to previous years? Well, thank you, Jared. Thank you for asking that question. My opinion? 6 quarterbacks were taken out of the first 11 picks in that mock draft. That is something that has certainly not been the trend over the past few years. Traditionally, you've seen maybe the top high end last year, Stroud, Young, etc. go in that top range, but 6 out of the top 11, it's basically unheard of. And there's a reason for that, because the next 23 picks, there's only one quarterback taken, Tyler Shuck. And then from there, frankly, I liked what I saw at that back end. I purposely didn't take a second quarterback until that 8th, 9th round bounce back, because I wanted to see what would be available. And frankly, I was happy, because 31 points per game in 22 of Michael Pratt, who beat USC, my number 1 pick, Caleb Williams, in the bowl. Somehow, he is still available in the 9th round. So I was very happy with how that materialized. That being said, if I had to do it over again, would I do something different? I would, because in that 2-3 bounce back pick after taking Caleb Williams, I should have gone wide receiver. I took Zachary Franklin and I took Nick Singleton. But I was pretty happy with the depth of running backs towards the end of the draft. I will get into that a little bit later. So I would have, instead of the running back wide receiver combo, I would have went wide receiver. I would have went Franklin, and then one of the next couple of guys taking either Dorian Singer, for USC, obviously, for that pairing, or I really liked the selection of Jacob Cowan as well. So I think I would have gone with him, one of those two players. If I didn't go that direction, Tez Walker, that's fine, but I'll get to UNC's wide receiver room later. That being said, as far as strategies and this player pool, I think it's pretty good. It's early, obviously, and we had a pretty good, solid, defined first 4 rounds. But after that, I felt like it got a little bit dodgy with the wide receivers. So that's why I would go with that particular philosophy. Next, which players was I surprised to see go undrafted through 9 rounds? First off, obviously, Sam the Hitman Hartman, going from Wake Forest to Notre Dame. Now, obviously, going from the slow mesh to a more plodding, methodical style that Tommy Rees employs over there is reason for concern. However, look at Ian Book. Ian Book put up plenty of fantasy points. You didn't have any issues with him. They made an actual competent signal caller 2 years ago. Obviously, Brian Kelly was there, but it was the same offensive staff, out of a Wisconsin transfer who was taken over by Graham Mertz. You know what I mean? So I'm not afraid of a guy who has proven himself time after time in Sam Hartman going over there and running a more pro-style offense. I think it's going to be just fine. And with the way that they typically dominate inferior opponents, he's going to be in great shape. And I'm still very bullish on Sam Hartman. Didn't go drafted for 9 rounds. Surprising to me. Now, the next question was, how do I feel about the players that will be rising and falling over the course of the off season? Now, if there's anything that I think will certainly transpire, it's going to be this. You're not going to see 6 quarterbacks go in the first round every draft. In fact, it's just simply not going to happen. The value's too good down the board. We've proven that with this particular draft. You saw Kyle McCord. You saw Preston Stone, the aforementioned Michael Pratt. Brendan Armstrong, reunited with offensive coordinator Robert Nye over there at NC State. You're going to have some talent in that 7 to 9 range. I do think you will start to see players doing the quote-unquote zero QB theory. That being said, I see more wide receivers kind of crawling up in the first round, and I see a nice, solid, deep running back class. And let me kind of get to that. Obviously, I talked about how I liked how the quarterbacks were taken a little bit later in that 9th round range, but the running backs too. Look at the last 3 running backs who were selected. One of whom was mine, Marshawn Lloyd, again, USC. But we're talking about a former 5-star who tore up his knee as a freshman. Came back, took a little time. This year, he was phenomenal. Not just running the ball between the tackles either, out of the backfield. Look, you're going to see Marshawn Lloyd take over the Travis Dye role. I'm not even remotely concerned about Austin Jones, who was fairly pedestrian in his brief run at the starting job. There's a reason why they brought in Marshawn Lloyd. It's to put Austin Jones back to where he belongs as a number 2 running back. Look at Trayshawn Ward, Kansas State. He's coming right in. He's taking that role that Deuce Vaughn had, and he's going to run with that. Why wouldn't I want Trayshawn Ward? He proved at a part of a 3-back committee at Florida State that he's legit. Sure, Trey Benson's there and has proven himself to be an NFL draft-worthy running back, so he transferred out. But dude, you're at Kansas State. They have a veteran quarterback in Will Howard there, fully cucked Adrian Martinez. There you go, Heisey. I know you wanted to hear one of those. And as well, Javonte Barnes, Oklahoma. Yeah, great. Hey, look, I'm a Gavin Sawchuk guy. Everybody knows that. That being said, Javonte Barnes was the heir apparent all season long and even in the summer camp to the departed Eric Gray. Sure, I see his Thunder and Lightning combo being an issue, but I think it's 65-35, okay? And that's good enough in a Jeff Lebby offense to see Javonte Barnes be very productive for the 9th round pick that he was taken at. Those are the last 3 running backs who were taken in this draft. That's pretty damn good. If you look at what the last wide receivers were taken, flyers. We're taking shots now. Okay? We don't have solid, dependable guys like those 3 running backs we just discussed. I think you're going to be in good shape if you go, maybe take one of the top quarterbacks if you want to go that direction. Wait until round 9, 10, 11 to get your second. Stockpile skill, specifically wide receivers in the early rounds, mid rounds, hit those running backs. That would be my personal read. So in summation, thank you very much for taking the time to watch my portion of the Chasing the Natty Way Too Early 2023 mock draft. I look forward to seeing you playing college fantasy football this season, as we all should.
Thank you, Eric. Up next is Anthony Mustin, aka Farnsworth, one half of the dynamic duo of the Ankle Biters podcast. Y'all can find him on Twitter at CFF Nation. Tell them what they need to hear, Farnsworth.
What's up, world? This is Tony, a.k.a. Farnsworth with CFF Nation, here to discuss the first, way too early, first 2023 mock draft of the year that I had the opportunity to take a part in. Thanks to Jared Palmgren for inviting me on with such great minds in the CFF community. Had a lot of fun, as it always is. You get great insight and great perspective on players, and it helps you out with evolve and how you should value this player or that player. Let's jump right into this. I had the opportunity of having the second pick of the draft, a 5-point passing yard. So we went with a quarterback. I generally will never almost go with a wide receiver in the first round. That's just my thing. And so it was either quarterback or running back. And here we had the opportunity to choose between, I was looking at Drake May or Austin Reed. But Drake May had the rushing yard upside, even though Austin Reed had more rushing touchdowns. But Drake May, again, a wonderful dual threat quarterback. I think it was a no-brainer when you really looked at the numbers. Phenomenal freshman last year. Had to go with him. Couldn't help but do that. That was right. I mean, it was right there. Second pick. We took a running back there. I wanted Damian Martinez, but he didn't make it back to me there. And so with that pick, I took Jermaine Brown Jr., running back out of UAB. He's taking over the backfield for Dwayne McBride, who's departing for the NFL. I think he should light it up this year. Comes back around. I was looking for Malik Neighbors, but he didn't make it to me. Got again by Eric Froton, so we went with Devontae Walker. Actually, I wasn't looking for Malik Neighbors here. I was looking for him later in the draft. But Devontae Walker, this is the third round. I was looking for the stack. Is what I wanted. The Drake May and the Devontae Walker stack. Got that. Devontae Walker, the transfer from Kent State, now a Tar Heel. And in the fourth round, I think this was the steal of the draft for me. In my eyes, we get Marquez Cooper here, going from one situation where he was a lead back, workhorse back, to another situation, lead back, workhorse back. So this was a wonderful observation on his part, and where he would transfer out with some of the other players would kind of take note. But this should be wonderful. And to get him in the fourth round was amazing. Now, this is the round, fifth round, is where I wanted to get Malik Neighbors. It's coming around on the elbow, but Eric took him right there, so we couldn't get him. So I ended up getting one of my pre-draft targets, Jordan Curley, wide receiver from SMU. So that was wonderful there. We're able to get him. He should take over right there for Rashee Rice, we hope. And so I feel good about that. So sixth round, I'm feeling really good at this point, filling the skill positions pretty well. Thought it was a good time to grab another one of my targets, Riley Leonard, quarterback from Duke. I think this guy's going to be phenomenal in 2023. I'm extremely high on him this year. Between the transfer portal and the coaching carousel, the QB position it's real tasty this year. Got a lot of wonderful options, man, this year. Doesn't seem like that for the wide receivers, though. A bunch of questions there. But for the quarterback position, it should be really, really fun this year from that position. But this is one of the guys that I'm really, really high on this year. 7th round, looking to finish off the wide receiver demand. So kind of go off the radar, somewhat off the radar with this one. Jordan Tyson, talented freshman from Colorado. Dion is there. You got Shador Sanders there, who is a phenomenal talent. But you get Sean Lewis in that offensive system from Kent State. He should be able to, even though Jordan Tyson's coming off an injury, season-ending injury, I think he was the best option in that room, no doubt. And so, again, I think Sean Lewis will find plenty of ways to utilize his skill set and get him the ball. 8th round, somewhat of a homer pick. We went with Javonte Barnes, running back out of Oklahoma. I think it'll pay great dividends in Levy's offense. I do recommend in deeper leagues, by the way, that if you draft him, you got to handcuff him with Gavin Sawchuk. You got to do that. I think he'll have plenty of opportunity to just tote the rock. But this is going to be an amazing 1-2 punch. We finished off the draft in the 9th round with another one of my pre-draft targets here with R.J. Maryland, tight end out of SMU. He should be, this year, very super talented tight end, should be far and away the lone option at the tight end position. He was kind of sharing that a little bit last year, sharing some snaps. But the staff loves him, and so do I. Very, very talented, uber talented. But that was it for the draft. My favorite pick of the draft was probably Marquez Cooper. I got him in the 4th. The guy had over 1,300 rushing yards last year, 13 touchdowns on 285 carries. Did that in 12 games. Leaves that system. Well, not really leaves it, but his coach leaves. He gets in the portal, and he finds something similar. He goes to a system that afforded Carson Steele 1,566 rushing yards, 14 touchdowns on 289 carries, also in 12 games. But here's the thing. You got to remember, Cooper, in 3 out of his first 4 games, had stiff competition. He had Washington, he had OU, and Georgia on the slate. And the kid still had 1,300 yards and 13 touchdowns on the season. So, and we got him in the 4th round. I thought that was a wonderful steal. Least favorite pick of the draft is probably Javonte Barnes. A bit of a homer pick. I'm not saying I don't like him, but kind of a homer pick. How much of a workload does DeMarco Murray surrender him as the lead back? Is it 70-30, 65-35, 60-40? Because Gavin Sawchuk is for real. He is a dude, and you're going to have to keep an eye on that because, again, it may be a nice 1-2 punch, but you got to handcuff him there. But it was a wonderful time for me. Again, thank you, Jared, for the opportunity to come in and do this with you guys. It's always fun. Hopefully we can do it again. Till then, I'm out.
Thank you, Farnsworth. Up next is the host of the Chasing Natty CFF podcast, as well as the special, me, Jared Palmgren. You can find myself on Twitter at CFF_Jared. Take it away, me, I guess. All right, thank you very much for that wonderful introduction from the very handsome host of this year's special. If y'all don't know who I am Jared Palmgren, the host of the Chasing Natty, a CFF podcast. I'm also the head CFF content creator over at campusofcanton.com. Go check out all of our stuff on YouTube and the website. In addition to that, you can find myself on Twitter. I am at CFF_Jared. You can also find the podcast's Twitter at Chasing the Natty. And for this here way too early draft, I had the 103 pick. I guess I'll just quickly run through my team in general here. First pick I took was Quinshon Judkins, the running back at Ole Miss. Followed that up with Torrey Horton, the wide receiver out of Colorado State. Then I went Kavorian Barnes, the running back at a UTSA. Followed that up with another UTSA player. I took DeCorian Clark, the wide receiver at a UTSA there. Followed that up with Jace McClellan, the running back out of Alabama. After that came Derwin Burgess, wide receiver out of Georgia Southern. In addition, and after that, I took my 2 quarterbacks. I first took Brennan Armstrong, the quarterback now at North Carolina State. And then followed that up with Jalen Daniels, the quarterback out of Kansas. And with my last pick, I took Mason Taylor, the freshman phenom tight end out of LSU. So that's kind of my overview of my draft real quick. And again, if you're watching this on YouTube, you'll be able to see my team over there to the left. That was mostly for you podcast listeners, so you can have a basic idea of what's going on here. Anyway, let's get to these questions. General opinion of this year's pool of players. So running back was a lot deeper than I thought this year. And my initial fear of running back this year came from the fact that out of the top 24 running backs from last year, only 5 of them returned to their previous schools. 3 of them transferred to a different spot, some better than others, in my opinion, in terms of their fantasy impact for this year. And then the rest of them went off to the draft and just got out of there. And then you had wide receivers, which I thought would be a little bit deeper, because out of the top 24, you see you had 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 of them come back to their schools. But then I realized that those were the only really great options in terms of guys who were coming back, because after that, it got really hard to find guys who were just kind of known quantities. And then when it comes to quarterback, again, clear top tier for QB at the very top. 6 guys at the quarterback position went off in the first round. But in my opinion, there's plenty of great options later. So if you're just one of those guys where you want to grab one guy and then wait forever in order to grab your second guy, I definitely think it's a valid strategy for this year. Did I like the team that I drafted? I didn't love it initially, but it's kind of been growing on me ever since. Like I definitely, when you're in the moment of drafting, you start questioning yourself pretty much immediately after you make any given pick. But like now that I've had about a week to look at this draft before I recorded this, I'm really looking at it and saying, you know what? If I was going into the season, I would feel pretty strongly about this one. What's something I would do differently next time? Definitely would hit some wide receivers earlier. Again, that it dried up so quickly for me. It was something I shifted pretty early on in this draft, where I was planning on taking some wide receivers late, but realized very quickly that there was just not a lot of guys that I loved. I like the 3 that I drafted for the most part, but I definitely would have felt a little bit better had maybe I gone Marvin Harrison Jr. in the first round rather than Quinshon Judkins, or maybe I'd gone Jalen McMillan instead of Kavorian Barnes in the 3rd round. I love Judkins, I love Barnes, but I feel like with the guys that were available at running back in like the 4th to 6th round, I would have definitely been happier if I had gone RB heavy there rather than earlier in the draft like I did for this one. So that's probably something I'm going to change here in the future. Which players were I surprised that went undrafted through 9 rounds? A couple of guys here. 2 quarterbacks. Again, quarterback very deep this year. A lot of great fun options for you to kind of play around with. Pretty much all of the quarterbacks that were going in like the 7th through 9th round range, I'd feel pretty comfortable with. Like, you're getting guys, again, I got Brendan Armstrong and Jalen Daniels. I like both of those guys. I like Brendan Armstrong again, yes, because system matters in CFF, and he's going back to the system that made him a CFF relevant guy. So I expect big things from him this year. Jalen Daniels, dude, just absolutely blew up at times last year. If he didn't get hurt, probably would have been a top 12 CFF quarterback throughout the rest of the year. So I'm very happy to get him in like the 8th round. But again, there's other guys here that are fun too. Dylan Gabriel, he should be up for a pretty good year this year. Kyle McCord was in the 7th. Michael Pratt, a guy who was just absolutely on fire at the end of the year. He went off in the 9th round. So lots of great quarterback options. But again, 2 guys that I was surprised were not drafted at any point. Cameron Rising and KJ Jefferson. Again, 2 dual threat guys. If you're still able to get them in the 10th round, which is, again, our draft went to the 9th round. If you're able to get them in the 10th round, that just shows you how deep of options you have at quarterback this year. Running back, I think this was more due to people not realizing that he was coming back, but Jalen White, the running back out of Georgia Southern, he finishes the RB37, but he was as high as RB14 right before getting injured, and the rest of the season being very hampered in the second half there. But like, if he comes back and he's healthy, that is a wide open backfield that he can easily take right back over. Jalen Green, the guy who really backed him up for a while, he's off to East Carolina. So I think Jalen White's in for a pretty big year. And like, if I wasn't capped at 3 running backs for this draft, I definitely would have taken him probably in the like 8th or 9th round pretty easily. Another guy, in terms of wide receivers that surprised me, Terrell Vaughn, or really just any Utah State wide receivers. Again, this is still Blake Anderson's system. Yes, last year was a little bit of a mess. They tried to put Logan Bonner out there for whatever reason, and they tried their best, but it just wasn't working out. He just was way too beat up, injured. They're trying to hide all that kind of stuff. I don't know. They put Cooper Legas out there. He was not ready. He got better as the year went on. And you still saw the number one wide receiver in Brian Cobbs last year. Got that one right. Just wasn't quite as high of a ceiling as we're typically used to. Again, I think that's them breaking in new quarterback. I expect him to take a big step this year. And to me, the guy that's going to take over for that is going to be Terrell Vaughn. He was the clear number 2 guy last year. But again, I'm surprised he didn't go off the board at any point here. And then no Alabama wide receivers came off the board. I guess I shouldn't be super surprised because, again, just how much of a cluster that was last year. Burton, Brooks, like none of them really kind of stepped up. Some guys faded, some guys rose throughout the year. Never really got consistent on who those number 1 wide receivers are going to be. But you would think that, like, again, with wide receiver kind of drying up so quickly and, like, by the 7th and 9th round, you're just taking pot shots on guys that you just happen to like. You would think that like a Burton or even a Ja'Cory Brooks comes off the board. Like again, I'm in on Ja'Cory Brooks this year. I was a little wrong on him last year. I was kind of expecting him to not be as prevalent, but again, he was good. So I think it's going to be either him or Burton this year that takes off. We'll see. But again, I was kind of surprised that Alabama wide receivers were available that late. Some players I expect to rise or fall in the drafts as the year goes on. 2 running backs that went too late, in my opinion. LaDamian Webb and Jason McClellan. Those guys are not going to be available in the 4th and 5th round. I guarantee you both of those guys are going to rise, especially the moment that Jason McClellan is kind of becoming the clear number 1 running back for Alabama. That's always a great option for you to grab in CFF. And then a couple of guys I expect to fall. Quinn Ewers and Shedeur Sanders. I think they were kind of drafted at their ceiling in terms of ADP in this draft. I think they'll be divisive prospects this year. They're not going to be taken in the 4th and 6th rounds, respectively. I guarantee you both of those guys will come down a little bit. And then some quarterbacks I expect to rise. Kyle McCord, Joe Milton. Those guys both went pretty late in this draft. I guarantee you both of those guys will go up just because of system. Alrighty, I'm going above time already, so I really got to cut this short. Really appreciate you guys listening. Enjoy the rest of the experts you're going to listen to. Up next is Chris Moxley, one of the founders of Campus of Canton and co-host to Chasing the Natty during the season and Devy Debate year-round. You can find him on Twitter at ChrisMoxley19. Have at it, Mox.
Hey all, it's Chris Moxley with Campus to Canton. I was able to take part in this way too early CFF mock draft. Thanks to Jared for putting it together and everyone else for joining. It was a ton of fun. Really gave us our first look at the CFF landscape and how to approach it this year. It was before that I even had my rankings in. So it made me think a lot about, different things. And I hadn't really thought about what the players are going to look like. I think that this pool of players is shallow at certain positions. So my draft went something like this: Marvin Harrison Jr., Trey Benson, Brock Bowers, LaDamian Webb through my first 4 picks. Wide receiver was important to me because even looking at the board, I felt that this was going to be a pretty shallow position. And I think it played out that way. I took Marvin Harrison in round 1, and I didn't take another receiver till round 8. I don't really love the middle all that much. I think there's some interesting names, but a lot of honestly gaps and risk involved. So just some names that stick out to me, right? I think Jalen McMillan in the 3rd round, pick 29 by Josh, CFF guys. Really, really nice pick. I think that's really solid. Especially it's like almost a full round after Roma Dunze. So I think that's a solid value. Dorian Singer's a nice value in the 3rd as well. But overall, the round 5 is where you get pretty risky. Froton took Malik Neighbors, who I like as well. But a lot of risk after you get outside the first 4 rounds. So if you're going to invest in wide receiver this year, I think you need to do so early and then maybe wait till maybe after round 10 to really get some value there. That's the position that I feel the least secure about overall. I think that there are a lot of value at the other position. So I'll talk about quarterback real quick. I think quarterback is one that's really deep this year, and it's deep a lot of years. And a lot of that comes into matchup. So, later on in the season, you want to be playing a lot of these MAC guys. Earlier in the season, you might want to be playing a quarterback who has an easier out of conference schedule, maybe like like an Alabama, Georgia, etc. type of team. Leverage those players earlier in the year and then get easier matchups with your maybe group of 5 players. Quarterback felt good. I actually took 2 of them in the first 7 rounds. Joe Milton, who he went off the board as quarterback believe went out for the quarterback 11, if I have that right. If I'm wrong, Jared can correct me. But Milton, I thought it was good value there. I actually ranked him in my top 10 earlier. I think that his rushing ability is pretty impressive, and I think that he can operate the offense similarly to what Hendon Hooker did last year. I also took Kyle McCord in the 7th round. He'll end up as a top 12 quarterback for me as well. I think he's going to start at Ohio State, and the starter at Ohio State with Emeka Egbuka, Marvin Harrison Jr., and whoever that third option ends up being this year, probably a lot of Julian Fleming, is going to be a valuable position. He fell in this draft, I think, because there's risk. So I took him between Brennan Armstrong and Preston Stone, with Curtis O'Rourke and Jordan Travis right in the same area. I still think I would prefer McCord above all of those guys, but I do think there's a little bit of risk that you're getting there. Running back, a little shallow in terms of risk. I think that there's a lot more risk. So the first running back I took was Trey Benson. I really like Trey Benson. Then I took LaDamian Webb, and I took LaDamian Webb in the 4th round. I don't think he's going to end up there. I think he'll probably be a late 2nd, early 3rd round pick eventually. But I think where I got him in at the 45 spot, so late 1st or late 4th, good value. It's deep, just not have a really tough time gauging this entire after probably RB7, which is LaDamian Webb for me. It's a tough group to find who's going to be the next guy. Some good values in this draft, though. Again, Josh, who I think had one of the better drafts here, he grabbed Jaquinton Jackson and Rodney Hammond round 4 and 5. I expect both to go earlier in future drafts, but really, really nice value there. So there's players that I think have upside. Do I like the team I drafted? A little bit. I would do things differently. I would probably, so the two, we had to draft 3 wide receivers. Marvin Harrison Jr., like that pick. I would take him in the 1st round. I took him 4th overall. I would do it again. Don't love taking Jalil Farouk, who I think is wide receiver 1 at Oklahoma, but I wish I had gone somewhere else, or maybe invested in a wide receiver a little bit earlier than waiting to the 8th to take him. I took Nate McCollum as my last pick in round 9. I think he's a good value as well, but I wanted the wide receiver 2 for Drake May, and that's kind of what led me there. There are a couple players that I wish I had, targeted a little bit earlier. I think Derwin Burgess is one, obviously from Georgia Southern, that I really like. Sam Wiggless, big fan. He's coming back for Ohio this year. Just some values I feel like I passed on, maybe that I shouldn't have, and rearranged my draft board a little bit differently. Maybe I waited on Joe Milton and grabbed a Squirrel White at Tennessee, who I think could be a top 12 back in 2023, or top 12 wide receiver in 2023. My team is fine. I think my favorite pick, though, by far, is Brock Bowers in the 3rd. If I'm getting Brock Bowers in the early mid 3rd, I'll do that every single time. I just think he's a difference maker at the position. And I would, if I'm not getting Brock Bowers, I won't draft a tight end till around 9 or 10, maybe. Jatavian Sanders, I also drafted. I just felt he was like good value at the end of round 6. I wouldn't do that in a real draft, but for the purpose of ADP, I think that that's probably where he's going to go. And I think that he's my tight end 2 on the year. Brant Kuithe went ahead of him, and Keithy went ahead of him, and Caden Prescorn went ahead of him, but he still went tight end 4. So interesting list. I like the rest of my picks enough. But something I would do differently next time is probably wait on running back and take wide receiver a little earlier. So LaDamian Webb in the end of round 4, I really liked. But then in round 5, Jason McClellan, Rodney Hammond, Shea Bangura, Bucky Irving all went in that round. And I probably could have waited. And if I had gone someone else, I could have gotten a Jalen McMillan, Zachary Franklin, Devontae Walker at the top of round 2. So that's how I would handle it differently moving forward. I do think I like the draft. I like going wide receiver round 1. I'd probably go wide receiver round 2 again. Or I would take Brock Bowers probably at pick 21 if I did it over. I would want to make sure that I get him. So if I get him at the 2-3 turn, I'm pretty happy with that outcome. In all honesty. But this is a really fun practice. We'll be doing a bunch more of these, and Jared did a great job putting this on. And I felt like my draft was all right. There were some really strong drafts in here and a lot of really competitive folks. So I was just happy to be a part of it. And I'm interested to hear what everybody else says.
Thank you, Moxley. Coming up next is Josh Chevalier, CFF analyst for Fantasy Points and forever owner of the #1 overall pick in redraft. You can find him on Twitter at CFFGuys. Go ahead and enjoy his analysis.
Hey guys, my name's Josh. I'm from Fantasy Points, and I'm also on Twitter at CFFGuys. So thank you, Jared, so much for having me on in his first mock draft. And so I'm going to walk through just the general questions that Jared asked us to answer. And so, first question is, what is your general opinion of this year's pool of players? Man, I think like most of us, I really like this group of players this year. I think when you look at it overall, like quarterback, super deep again, running back, always deep, always good, replacement players coming up. And then wide receivers, I feel like most years, like, man, there's a couple at the top that are really, really good. And then, man, it drops off pretty quickly. And so I think finding good wide receivers is something that we should all be striving for this year. Did I like the team that I drafted? Yeah, I always like the team I drafted. Does that mean it's a good team? I guess, we'll have to see as time, ultimately tells the truth about my team. So, but, I think this year I'm just going best available player throughout the draft. And so I think I did that overall. I guess if there's one thing I would have changed, I took Damian Martinez in the second. I had picked 1.5 overall. So in the second, I don't know what that makes it, 2.8, 2.9, 2.9, I think. And yeah, so, I liked overall my team, but, one pick I might have done differently is Damian Martinez from Oregon State. I love Damian Martinez. I took him in the second. And honestly, I was between him and Zachary Franklin, and I just wasn't sure if Zachary Franklin was actually coming back or not. And so I think because when we drafted the day of the declarations, and he hadn't said either way other than a random video in a classic, G5 way of finding things out. So, and he went about 4 or 5 spots later. So I think that's a guy I would have probably taken in the second round instead of Damian Martinez, just because I like the running back options later better than the wide receiver options. So then I would have started Bo Nix with my 1.5, and then at 2.8, I would have had Zachary Franklin, and then come back with Jalen McMillan with a 3.5. So I think I would have really, really liked that start. But oh well, it's first mock of the season. We'll figure it out later. But a couple other questions. I think what's something you do differently? I think for me, what would I have done differently is just that, right? I would have taken Zachary Franklin instead of Damian Martinez. The other questions here: do I have a favorite pick? Do I have a least favorite pick? I think my favorite pick is I took Jaquindon Jackson in the 4th round, I believe. And man, I just love his talent. You can see behind me, I got a little Jalen Glover poster, so you can tell how big of a fan I am of that kid. And I chose Jaquindon Jackson. So I think that just goes to show my belief in Jaquindon Jackson, maybe more importantly, the staff's belief in that he can really be a superstar. And I think Jalen Glover will get his run next year, but I think he might have to wait his turn until 2024 just to be the bell cow, because I think Jaquindon might take that role. And so he just showed a lot this year. He was clearly head above and everybody else in that backfield once Tavion Thomas was gone. And so I really like his upside, and I feel like I can also handcuff Jalen Glover later in the draft as well. My least favorite pick, again, Damian Martinez. Even though, man, I absolutely love Damian Martinez as a player. I love his talent. But it's just about maximizing value. So, a couple other questions here. Which players were you surprised went undrafted through 9 rounds? Man, I don't know if there's a player that I was surprised by, but I just think somebody like Barry and Brown is really intriguing to me. I think he sparks an interesting debate with Kentucky, right? Liam Cohen, the new / old OC of Kentucky, loves to feature the slot receiver. He comes from the Sean McVay coaching tree. We saw what Wan'Dale Robinson did with him 2 years ago. And then Tavian came in this last year with a different OC, didn't have the year we were expecting. But now Liam Cohen's back, and he seems to really favor Tavian Robinson. But Barian Brown is the best wide receiver on that roster, hands down. And so, and Dane Key's really good too. So Barian played a lot on the outside last year. He can play the slot, but that's not really maybe where his future is. So this is a great debate of like, man, do you go with the most talented receiver or the position that's generally targeted in the system? And I think that's going to be a good debate. I think it's going to be interesting to see in spring ball how they use Barian Brown, throughout the spring, and if he's really the featured guy, or is it Tavian as just the fill-in slot receiver, even though he's not a better player than Barian. So yeah, that would be one thing. As Barian Brown is just really intriguing to me this year. I think, what draft strategy do you think is the best for this year? Man, last year I kind of veered away from my typical strategy, which is best available player, and I went heavy wide receiver early. And man, if you go look back at the first 2 rounds last year specifically, man, there's a lot of misses by a lot of people, and including me. I was picking Jermaine Burton a lot, and so I think I went heavy wide receiver early last year, and I think this year I'm just going best available player, and hopefully we can make it up on the back end of drafts with quality wide receivers. So I'm not going to force anything necessarily, but when it's a tie for a guy like Zachary Franklin or Damian Martinez, like this last draft, I'm probably going to go wide receiver if I feel like I can get value later at the running back position. So, yeah, Jared, again, thanks, man. Thanks for having me on. Thanks for listening to my ramblings, and I hope it made some kind of coherent sense. And looking forward to the offseason, man. It's the best time of the year. All these best balls we get to do and mock drafts, and we get to speculate. And then if you're like me, you just get to eat all your own crow during the season when you're wrong. So y'all have a good offseason. Look forward to interacting with everybody. And thanks again, Jared. Bye.
Thanks, Josh. Next, we're going to hear from the king of spreadsheets and owner of CFB Winning Edge, Nicholas Ian Allen. You can find his work on Twitter at CFB Winning Edge. Take it away, Nick.
Hi, this is Nicholas Ian Allen of CFB Winning Edge. You can follow me on Twitter at CFB Winning Edge and check out our Patreon, patreon.com/CFB Winning Edge. I'd like to thank Jared for inviting me to participate in this mock. It's always a great time and a great opportunity to look ahead and try to take stock of what the upcoming CFF year is going to look like. With that in mind, I don't necessarily have an opinion yet of this year's pool of players. It's very, very early in my calendar, not surprisingly, but I'm right in the middle of working on my returning production database and still have a ways to go. So I've jotted some things down here and there. Some positions, maybe even most positions, seem pretty deep just based on it. It seems like we're seeing some players take advantage of extra eligibility, but also perhaps with some NIL opportunities. Some guys might be sticking around a little bit longer in college than jumping right away to the opportunity to go pro. So I don't know, hard numbers yet, obviously, but it seems like maybe we're going to be pretty deep across the board. My particular team in this draft, I don't necessarily like it, don't hate it. I did come with sort of a specific goal to draft, for the most part, players who were well known, who have been productive CFF players already in their career. Didn't want to go outside of the box very much, wanted to sort of see what others might do with a player who may be stepping into a new role, maybe stepping into a new opportunity as a transfer, what have you. I, for the most part, just sort of went by the returning numbers who were the highest scorers available from last season, the exception being Brant Kuithe, the tight end that I took in the 3rd round, just a couple of picks after Brock Bowers. Kuithe, of course, missed a big chunk of last season due to injury, but has been a productive player in the past. But pretty much everyone else, for the most part, I took one of the top players available based on their 2022 production, and kind of wanted to see where others might look to take somebody who's a little, less established, perhaps. So when I'm looking, what will I do differently next time? I probably will work out of the box a little bit. I do plan to not draft anyone I drafted in this round, in this mock. I typically try to do that between my first and second, and sometimes even third mocks of a new season, just to see where I might differ from the rest of the group on a particular player. But there's a very good chance that I will start to dabble a little bit more in more systems plays, more maybe bounce back opportunities, things like that. So I definitely do plan to mix it up a little bit. As for players I was surprised went undrafted, had I not taken Brant Kuithe as the second tight end off the board, and as early as I did, which I probably went a little earlier than I would next go round if Kuithe was going to be my selection there. But I'm considering Bryson Nesbitt of North Carolina in the mix for that, third or certainly I think a top 5 tight end, even though he's going to have other tight ends on the field with him. Kamari Morales does have eligibility remaining, and as far as I know is planning to come back. Nevertheless, Nesbitt is really just a big athletic receiver. Plays, a lot of snaps in the slot, nearly 200 pass snaps in the slot last year, was targeted 50 times. And I feel like with, Josh Downs and Antoine Green moving on, there's certainly an opportunity for Nesbitt to step up and become a bigger piece of that offense as a whole. And just as basically a matchup nightmare, and somebody who gets a lot of targets in the red zone, a lot of opportunities to score touchdowns. I feel like he's really in line for a bigger season than he had last year, when he had 500 yards and 4 touchdowns. So he's certainly somebody that I'm going to be looking to draft early and often in 2023. So I expect him to be among, the risers. I'm not, 100% sure how I feel about who might fall. It seemed like at the time that Chris K taking Tyler Shuck in the 2nd round, that seemed a bit high. I mean, I was a big believer in Shuck last year, and unfortunately he was really, really limited due to injury. Came back, of course, in the bowl game, had a big game, and in that Texas Tech offense, if he's, definitely going to be the starter, has an opportunity to put up huge numbers. However, Baron Morton played well at times when he had an opportunity to start. Some think that he probably, even has a higher ceiling and might give Shuck, some real competition in the spring and fall for that job. So that makes me a little bit nervous, but I will say if we, get a really good idea that Shuck is far and away the favorite and basically the starter until determined otherwise, then I certainly understand, but would not be terribly surprised if he falls a little bit just because of some of those questions, based on last season. Strategy I think is best. I went really, really heavy on quarterbacks last year, and it seems like, at least as far as this mock, that there might be a half dozen potential first-round quarterbacks in 2023. After Caleb Williams and Drake May went 1 and 2, I mean, I don't think anybody was reached really for Nix or Reed or Harris or Penix, and then as I said, Shuck is I think in that conversation if we knew for sure that he was going to be the starter. So despite that, I do think that quarterback is a deep position as always. I may trade to mix it up a little bit different than what I did last year, and if I don't get one of those, first 4 or really those first two quarterbacks, I might just sort of, sit for a little bit and try to take a larger number with some guys who have, some high ceilings but might not be as established. So that's probably something I'll do a little bit more this year than next year. I didn't really, like I said, didn't do anything unorthodox, went really, really vanilla with the draft strategy for this first one. So didn't necessarily take anyone to get anybody to talk. Maybe the exception is Ryan O'Keefe. At Boston College, pretty terrible offense altogether, but Zay Flowers did a great job there, and Ryan O'Keefe is about a carbon copy, about as close as you could possibly get to Zay Flowers. So BC did show some improvement late in the season, moving to a new quarterback after Phil Jerkovic went down with injury, and now of course he's transferred. They do have a new offensive coordinator coming in. We don't necessarily yet know who that is as I record this. So not entirely sure what the offense is going to look like, but Ryan O'Keefe, really explosive playmaker. And we've seen what somebody who is basically has the same exact skill set, Zay Flowers, what he can do. So maybe he was the exception. He's a player that I like a lot. Would love to have seen him in maybe a more explosive offense, but he should get a ton of touches and just opportunities similar, I would expect, to what Zay Flowers did at BC. So again, Jared, thank you for putting this together. Thank you for inviting me. Again, my name's Nicholas Ian Allen. If you're interested in returning production numbers and projected depth charts, we've got a lot of new stuff coming out this spring. Check us out on Patreon, patreon.com/CFBWinningEdge, and reach out to me on Twitter at CFBWinningEdge if you have any questions. I'm always happy to help. So good luck to everybody, and look forward to doing another one of these again soon.
Thank you very much, Nick. We're halfway through the special and we're really just getting started. Up next is Chris K., host of the Burning the Red Shirt podcast and CFB DFS guru extraordinaire. You can find him on Twitter at RealistChrisK. The mic is yours, K.
What's going on, everybody? This is Chris K. from the Burning the Red Shirt podcast from Campus to Canton as well. You can find me on Twitter at RealistChrisK. What a fun little experiment here, right? With the way too early mock draft. I thought it was a good time. I always love messing around with the guys and talking about college football. Can't be never a bad thing when we do that. But, looking at this year's drafts, I think really early on, I learned something pretty quickly. And I'll get into that here in a little bit, but it's always great to see it because you see value opposed, what other people are believing in, what they see, guys that maybe jump off the board to others compared to you. And then you can do more research as to why they may be thinking that way or listen to their content, that type of thing, and figure that out. But, this year's pool of players, I think, as the COVID year continues to play an impact, we see older players, we see people, with the NIL impacting everything. I think we have a pretty deep pool of players. It's just, there's so much uncertainty right now. So one of the first things I learned, like I was alluding to, was that QB is pretty heavy at the top. I think there's like 4 to 5 guys that are incredible talents in terms of on the field, and then from a CFF perspective. But then I think there's a lot of murkiness between maybe the 6-7 QB and the 30th quarterback. I think there's some justification to each of them to a certain degree. And because of that, I think going into future drafts, if I'm not getting one of the top 4 to 5, I'm probably waiting and kind of getting 2 in the 3rd, 4th, 5th, maybe 6th round range, just kind of seeing how other people do it, and then making sure that the guys that are my favorites, I am ready to attack. I thought there's some really interesting names that went kind of early. I'm never on Quinn Ewers. I probably won't be on Shadur Sanders from Colorado, but did think those picks were pretty interesting and curious to see, what people are seeing there. Overall, I picked from the 7th spot. Started with Rasheen Ali, the running back from Marshall, then Tyler Shuck, Dorian Singer at USC, Aiden Robbins, the now BYU running back. One of my personal favorites, Squirrel White, the Tennessee receiver, then Sam Wiglis, the Ohio receiver, Curtis Rourke, the QB from Ohio, Trayshawn Ward, Kansas State running back that was at FSU the years prior, and then Colston Loveland, the Michigan tight end. Overall, I liked my draft. I thought, I kind of mentioned, taking Shuck in the 2nd round in hindsight, probably not the best idea. I think he does have some crazy upside, like we saw in his bowl game. But I was talking to Bainbridge on the side just about him as a potential CFF player, and just think that you're going to have to use a handcuff at some point. And if you're taking a quarterback in the second, third round, like, you don't really want to have to take a handcuff there. But do like him, just not that high in retrospect. I think the Ohio tandem is going to be really interesting. I like Sam Wiglusz and Curtis Rourke, but, I want Rourke to be healthy. We saw a pretty different passing game from Ohio when Wiglusz was hurt. So he's coming back from, I believe, an ACL injury. So depending on how he recovers will impact where I rank him. I think he's a pretty elite option, top 15, but if he's not going to play the first couple of weeks, then obviously that impacts him and his star receiver Wiglusz. If there's one player I think that moves up boards as time goes on, it's Trayshawn Ward from Kansas State. I think he's really a good running back at FSU. He was awesome last year at FSU. Just that was a crowded backfield, split carries, that type of thing. And we saw Kansas State likes to run it, right? Obviously no one's going to replace Deuce Vaughn in that backfield, but they were really pretty productive, and they returned a few different players that make that offense interesting. I think, I took him in the 8th round of a 12-teamer. I could see him in the 4th or 5th round. I love Aiden Robbins. Maybe Dorian Singer was a little high. USC, they do spread it around a good bit. I don't think he's going to be he's not coming into the season like Jordan Addison was last year, who was a late first, early second round pick. Do you think that he'll have some potential there, but maybe a round or two later? I've already kind of mentioned what I would do differently next time. I think I would go heavier on a flex at the start, or take a QB in the first round. Otherwise, wait on the QBs there. I think the strategy that is probably best is that I think right now we just know so much about the quarterbacks. There's less question marks around so many of them that I think that we can use that to our advantage. Take a more solidified, less risk, a risk adverse player early in terms of the flex guys, and then know that, hey, that my QB 25 to 35, those are all really good quarterbacks that we know there's no risk in, and just take them later, because there are a lot of battles that have to be won. Like a guy like Marshawn Lloyd, I think he could bump up big time in drafts. I think a USC running back's always great, but that's kind of a crowded backfield. So that's my, situation where, he could be really a great 3rd, 4th rounder type value that you get 6th, 7th, 8th round, just because we don't know a ton about what they want to do in the backfield. Squirrel White, I think, is another guy that could bump up in drafts. It's Tennessee receiver 1. We saw what he could do in the bowl game against Clemson, a legitimate defense there with Joe Milton, who's going to be the quarterback again. So, you like to see that kind of combination be successful already. I love Joe Milton. I think there's enough reason to not take him as high as he went in this draft, but I think he is going to be a great quarterback in 2023. I wonder where a Brew McCoy or the transfer, I think it was Dante Thornton from Oregon, where do they play into this? But I think Squirrel is going to be, no matter what, that safer pick, and getting him in the middle of the 5th round feels like a steal. So super looking forward to more of these drafts and seeing what everybody else says here in this. This is sometimes considered some of the best content, some of the best fun to have. The debate, the back and forth is always a good time for us. So looking forward to it, and we'll see you on the other side.
Thank you, Chris. Up next is one of the newest faces in the CFF landscape, and that is the dynamic duo from the CFF Lists account, William Barnett and Jeremy Miller. You can find both of their work on Twitter at CFF Lists. Gentlemen, take it away.
All right. This is J Mill and Willie B, aka OG J Mill on Twitter, and Willie B's on Twitter. We're the guys from CFF Lists, here to run down our way too early mock draft that we're so happy to be part of with CFF Jared and the crew. Right off the bat, let's get into the first pick we made, Willie. I think we both loved seeing Austin Reed sitting right there in the middle of the draft. I think he was the 5th quarterback off the board, but you and I probably both had him in the top 2 or 3, and we're more than happy to take him, don't you think?
Yeah, absolutely. I don't want to give rankings away, but I know you had him a lot higher than that. So yeah,
Yeah.
very happy to get him there.
I'm happy to take him with any of those top three guys, assuming everybody else likes Caleb Williams and May. Let's move around real quick to like just the opinion in general on this year's draft class. You know, I know you and I talked, skipping to our last pick, but sticking at quarterback, we jumped in and got Delora. We both felt good, I think, about him having a young team last year and having the success he did with a young team. But we were very comfortable, I know, taking him at the very end because we felt like once you get past those top 5 or 6 quarterbacks, there's an extremely deep group of quarterbacks this year, and there's probably not a rush to take your QB2s, maybe even your QB3s. You have anything to add about that or Delora in general?
No, I agree with that. I mean, there were about 3 guys I believe that we wanted. I think Gabriel got sniped for us, but I was still very happy to get Jaden. So
yeah, not to mention, you know, when we talk about players that were left over after the draft, you know, KJ Jefferson was the other one we considered taking with our last pick. You had guys like Hartman, JT Daniels, Adrian Martinez, Hennigan. These are all guys that weren't taken, you know, among the top 24 that I think anybody would be happy to have, you know, as their quarterback 3s, you know, maybe even a quarterback 2 that could, you know, hold their weight. Moving on to running back, I know we actually skipped and took a Dunze with our second pick, and that's because there was a big run at running backs going into that second round coming back to us. So we decided to skip. I know initially we did take a Dunze because we thought that really top tier crop group of receivers was a little more limited. You know, it gets a little bit, you know, more slim pickings once you get past maybe that top 5 or top 10. We both like a Dunze, I think, in the top 5. So we snatched him up in the second round. But looking then at the running backs, we actually had to break up a big running back run. We liked Steele. We took him in the 3rd round. I know we were sniped in terms of Cooper, you know, going just before him. But, you know, there were a couple others. I know you like Bangura. We considered Gore, but we were very happy to get Steele. You know, what are your thoughts about him, you know, being at UCLA and taking him that early in the 3rd?
No, I mean, I felt that we definitely could have gotten him there. So that's why I was really happy that we did get a Dunze, because after Corum went Shipley, Sanders.
I think Judkins went before him also.
Yeah. We were both in agreement. Okay, yeah, we just need to wait, get ahead of this receiver run that would have gone. So very happy to get Rome there.
Yeah, and we did have again like every year you're going to have your top tier where there's 4 or 5 guys. If you can't get your hands on them, you might as well skip and wait, because then usually the next group of 6 or 7, you know, you don't want to panic if you don't get somebody in that top tier. And once they were gone, we kind of bumped down where Steele maybe started that 2nd tier, and we felt like we had several choices. So ended up then kind of going every other round, going receiver and then running backs. You know, we grabbed Tyler in the 5th. After we had taken Thrash in the 4th round. You want to tell the people like why we, you know, ranked Thrash, you know, so much higher than maybe some others, and grabbed him in the 4th with his move?
Yeah, with his, I mean, some people may shy away from him. You might think that he probably can't take that step, but you know, you get a 60 catch guy, 1,000 yards. I think we ended up with 2,000 yard receivers. I think all 3 of them had 7 touchdowns last year. So just staying in the right tier. If you feel like, you know, if you don't want to overreach, definitely have your tier, stick to your tier, and I think you'll be just fine.
Yeah. And with Brome going to Louisville, you know, that's really what sold us on Thrash. He had a great season last year. Brome's done an incredible job coaching up receivers and quarterbacks wherever he's gone with the system that he implements. So we feel good. Sturdivant, I know, you know, that's really, you know, we agreed on him, but that's one of your guys that you're really high on. You want to give your 2 cents on Sturdivant as well?
Yeah, I feel like based on what he did last year, and then now he's, you know, going to UCLA, getting a jump in offense, and we're talking about the style of offense that they have, the weapons that he's not going to be by himself.
Right.
You know, you're not going to be able to double and triple him like, you know, possibly like he was last year. So
right. And you know, we didn't have the pressure of this being, you know, a real team, but you know, had it been, I would have been a little bit upset. You reminded me after the fact that we did end up with UCLA running back with Steele and a UCLA receiver with Sturdivant. I don't know if we'd want to stack it relying on one in a critical position, having one of your key guys at a critical position on the same team. We'd probably want to, not stack so heavily with a running back from UCLA and a receiver. But I think as far as individual players, if we can get either one, having Steele or Sturdivant as a receiver or running back from UCLA can work for you, especially since they may not have as strong of a quarterback as they had last year. And speaking of things we might do over, we ended up taking Prescorn at tight end, which we got really excited about when he made the move to Ole Miss. Again, it's one of those things that kind of hit me later, like, oh, damn, Trigg is still there. Like, what are they going to do with Trigg and Prescorn? A little bit of buyer's remorse, maybe thinking like, wow, they really didn't use the tight ends that much last year, and kind of got more excited about the person than the system. But what are your thoughts on, do you agree that like maybe taking Prescorn could have been the pick that we regret, or maybe taking somebody different, or waited for the tight end? We took him in 7th, I think.
No, it might be regrettable, but there's a lot of people that regret taking Trigg last year. So
true.
I'm not gonna feel bad about it. I mean, I'm gonna go with the guy who's been proven, and I'd rather have that than take a chance, especially at tight end.
Right.
I mean,
right.
you can't just go on a possibility.
Right,
So,
right. We gotta do a quick wrap up. I know everybody's going to have their 2 cents in their teams, but the last thing I'll say as far as players, we've opted for a running back as our flex guy. We really liked Hemby at Maryland as the only guy. We don't really see anybody behind him at running back 2 or 3 that's going to take any carries away from him. We feel like you could put a lot of chips in on Hemby. And just to mention a few other players that we were a little bit surprised by, we were a little bit surprised there to see Ollie Jennings left at wide receiver. Thoughts on him quickly, Tracy, on being at Virginia Tech and how that might hurt him and why he might have been left behind?
No, I think that's the only reason I think that he's probably left behind is because his jumping competition coming from Old Dominion. That's the only thing that I can think of.
And I think just the question marks at quarterback too, would go along with that. Because I mean, you're looking at a guy who was a top 10 caliber receiver. He's the number 1 receiver remaining from last year after you take all the graded guys away and the NFL guys. So it was shocking to see Ollie Jennings sitting there as the highest points per game receiver going into this draft, and he went undrafted, in a 12-team league. Any final thoughts, Tracy, on the team?
No, I overall, I like what we did. Like I say, some people may judge the 2 Cal guys, and then like I say, we're Prescorn. But other than that, we got exactly what we wanted. We're kind of where we wanted. So it's hard to get sniped at quarterback, like you said, when it's so deep, especially in a 12-team league. I mean, you're going to find players all over the place. So
I'll finish by saying we were happy as can be to get Austin Reed as the 4th or 5th quarterback off the board, because the guy averaged 34 points a game in his last 5 games. So
4,200 yards and over 40 total touchdowns last year. You'll be happy to if he gave you 75% of that. So
exactly. All right. So good luck to everybody. We know it's early. We hope we can help.
Yep. Thanks for having us.
All right. CFF lists on Instagram and Twitter.
Thank you, gentlemen. Up next is the godfather of CFF, the gridiron scholar himself, John Laub. You can find him on Twitter at GridironScholar91. Imbue us with your wisdom, Mr. Laub.
Hey, good afternoon, everyone. Thanks for joining us for the way too early CFF mock draft. I am so happy to join everyone, and thank you, Jared, for inviting me to partake in this. It forced me to look at the player pool earlier than I probably would have normally, but I really had a blast. And for all of you, I wanted to just run down my picks before I answer some questions, everyone. At the quarterback position, I took Frank Harris and Taquan Finn, 2 dual threat quarterbacks. Running back, I took Raheem Sanders, Arkansas, Devin Neal, Kansas, and LaQuint Allen, Syracuse. Sean Tucker's gone. I was impressed by Allen's performance in the bowl game. I think he had 11 catches, some ridiculous number of receptions. He has the body. I think he's 6 foot, 195. I like the offense, so I was willing to take a chance on him. And then receiver, I went very conservative with players I have seen perform at their schools. Antoine Wells, South Carolina, Elijah Badger, Arizona State, and Troy Franklin earlier at Oregon. And I took the long shot. I think the tight end pool is weak. So my last pick, I took Tanner Kozel out of Ball State. And Jared was kind enough to ask us some questions about how we would like to address viewers. I love the quarterbacks and running backs in this group. I think they're very strong. Early looking at the rankings right now. My general strategy, and obviously as we move forward, everything could change, would be to grab one quarterback and one running back in the first 2 rounds of each draft. I want a strong quarterback and a strong running back. Now, obviously, value would determine everything. If a great receiver falls to the second round, I would obviously consider changing, but that would be my course. During the draft, there were 3 players I identified beforehand who I wanted to see what the community thought of them. And we have some value established. Shedeur Sanders, Colorado, the quarterback, playing for his dad. He went in the 6th round, so we have some established value. I like him a lot. I want to hear reports and see what happens with the Buffaloes and Sanders, but I'm interested in him. Running back Jalen Ott. He was a sticky kind of, what do you think of him? He had some up and downs. He was a freshman last year. Jalen Ott went in the 7th round. Now, there's some changes in California. I think they're having a change at the quarterback, right? Because I think their quarterback left. So there's still some more research I have to do. But Jaden Ott, we have a value. 7th round is where he was selected. And my friends, I'm going to go back to the well down in SEC country. Malik Neighbors, LSU. I was blown away, impressed by him at the end of the season. Look at his numbers. They're much better than I think most people understand. He went in the 5th round. I think he's going to move up draft boards. I like Malik Neighbors a lot, and I might be saying here something that's shocking. I think he's better than Kayshon Boutte. I really like him next year, so that I find fascinating. Now, one player I was shocked he didn't get drafted, but I kind of understand why. Will Rogers did not even get drafted. I believe he's got 2 straight seasons of over 30 touchdown passes. But man, the CFF community does not like the coaching change. We don't like that new offense. Many of us gotten burned last year by Brennan Armstrong. So I'm not surprised that he fell despite the numbers he has put up. Uniqueness this year. 6 quarterbacks taken in round 1 by the experts. If my memory serves me, that was not as common last year. So the community is thinking about the value of these high-end quarterbacks. We had a lot to return. I took a quarterback, Frank Harris, in the 1st round, so that surprised me. Tight end, very shallow. Even more shallow than last year. There are 2 studs, and then just start throwing darts after that. If you don't get the 2 studs, you might as well just throw a dart. I played tight end roulette last year. Sometimes it worked, sometimes it didn't. It's a very hard position, but I think that's going to, if you either draft one of the 2 studs or you wait. I did like my team. My favorite pick was DeQuan Finn Toledo in the 8th round. The MAC kind of went under the radar. I think the MAC action wasn't as bountiful as we have done in the past. And DeQuan Finn, I think, is going out the radar. I think he finished in the top 15 at the quarterback position last year for CFF. I mean, he was much, much better than people give him credit for. So I like that. Wide receivers. I'm probably going to be passing on the top end. Part of it is the burn from last year. Oh my God, did the top end wide receivers fail? Last year, I had wild success with the Puka Nakaus, the Xavier Hutchinsons, the middle round wide receivers. I am willing to draft 5 or 6 receivers who I have ranked in the 20 to 40 range. Let the chips fall when the season kicks off. 2 players that I am going to do something different on. I wanted to see what the community thought of them. I love Michael Pratt and Riley Leonard, the quarterbacks at Duke. I couldn't get either of them. They were both in my queue. I was looking to grab them, and they both went off right when I wanted them. Now I have some value on those two players, so I'm going to push them up the board. I would draft them in the 6th round next time if one of the two players in the 6th round. I like both. And then I have a non-drafted team. 3 players who I like, who I think you can get value on, who weren't in these 9 rounds. KJ Jefferson of Arkansas. They have a new offensive coordinator, Dan Enos. Look him up. He's going to produce numbers at the quarterback position. Now, I passed on KJ Jefferson because I had Raheem Sanders. I wouldn't have drafted 2 Arkansas Razorbacks. But let's say I didn't get Raheem Sanders, I probably would have taken KJ Jefferson. I like his ceiling, especially as a second quarterback. As a third quarterback, I'd be so happy with him. Donovan Edwards of Michigan did not get drafted. We don't know what Blake Corum is going to be like. I think we saw him at the end of the year. He was phenomenal, and even against in the Big Ten championship game and against TCU. I like Donovan Edwards a lot. I probably would have drafted him in the 10th round. And one wide receiver, everyone might think I'm a little bit crazy, but my guy who I like a lot, Alex Adams, former LSU wide receiver at Akron. These numbers are crazy. In 4 of his last 5 games, he had over 100 yards receiving. He scored 7 touchdowns, and he had a high of 150. Alex Adams is a bargain for a group of 5 wide receiver Akron. So those are my 3 under the radar in my queue players that I would be targeting next. Thank you, everyone, for watching. You can find all my college fantasy football information on Fantrax. It'll be there probably starting around March. And I want to thank everyone. It was so much fun. Please look at the board. Check it out. Just get some early value where we stand as a community. And thank you, Jared, for the invite once again.
Thank you, Laub. Coming up next is Mr. Matthew Hicks from the Rookie Big Board YouTube channel. You can find him on Twitter at the FF_educator. Go ahead and educate us, Matt.
Hey everybody, it's Matt Hicks from the Rookie Big Board at the FF_educator on Twitter. Drafted from the 10 spot here in this mock draft. I left here fairly confident with my roster. I wouldn't say it was a perfect draft, but I would say pretty good here for a first run, looking at what this player pool looks like in January. I would say right off the bat, what jumped out to me, having gone through the draft, is that quarterbacks are going to be king this year. Now, that generally is a trend, but I just felt like drafting at the 10 spot, it was hard for me to get a quarterback that I liked. So I pivoted off of quarterback early, and I got to say, I don't know if I would want to do that again. I got up here with the 110 off the board already. We had Drake May, Bo Nix, Austin Reed, Frank Harris. I would say in particular, the Austin Reed pick had me tilting because I thought at 110 he would be there. And of course, Caleb Williams was off the board first pick. So I went with Braylon Allen at my 110. I'm happy with that. It'll be interesting to see what that scheme looks like here. I know they're transitioning a little bit this offseason, so it'll be interesting to see how Braylon Allen fits into that. But I think it still feels safe to project a high volume role and that Braylon Allen has to play a big part of that offense. I think the red zone is what I'm interested in. What do those touchdowns look like? So coming off of that here, we went around the turn. I ended up with Travion Henderson with my 15th overall pick. I got to say this one was interesting. I double tapped the running back position, kind of not seeing those quarterbacks like I mentioned early. I usually like to go quarterback early, so I faded. I double tapped, went Travion Henderson, another guy in a split backfield here. Or I shouldn't say another guy in a split backfield, but Henderson in a potentially split backfield. The volume is a little uncertain here. So I'm kind of leaning into that volatility, which I don't mind doing this time of year, but it could make this mock draft look a little funny here a few months down the line. Back on the next turn here, I took Cade Klubnik and Quinn Ewers. I got to say, these are probably my 2 favorite picks. I'm regretting not taking quarterback right off the bat, but I think this is really good value here. This was post the Garrett Riley move to Clemson. And so for me, that makes Cade Klubnik a viable CFF option. So if I had to guess, Cade's probably going to have more of a second round, like a late second round ADP come June, July. So to get him here in the third round, I think is really solid. And then swinging back here, I'm going to lean into the Quinn Ewers hate. I think that Quinn Ewers was overly criticized coming off of his performance last season. He looked really good when healthy. He suffered that injury. He came back. I don't think he was 100%. And now we're heading into a second year here in the Quinn Ewers offense under Steve Sarkisian. I think there's a lot of opportunity for Texas in general to take a nice big step forward. We have the additions at wide receiver through the transfer portal. We have Xavier Worthy coming back. And now without Bijan Robinson here, there might be more of an emphasis on the pass game. So I really like that 3-4 turn. Working down here, I took a pair of wide receivers, McMillan out of Arizona and then Brew McCoy out of Tennessee. Maybe a little bit of Tennessee Vol fan bias here, but with Jalen Hyatt and Cedric Tillman moving on from the NFL, I think we can expect Brew McCoy to be that next main target up. Brew McCoy, a former 5-star guy, certainly has the talent. And we've seen in the Josh Heupel offense that once he turns it over to you, it makes you the featured wide receiver. Now, whether that's Velus Jones a couple years ago, whether that's Tillman, and then Hyatt when Tillman was out this year, now we have an opportunity for Brew McCoy to be that guy. And not knocking anybody else, there's some talented guys working up the depth chart, but I think Brew McCoy is going to get the first knock here on that. And then we leaned into a little bit of upside play here. And for me, once I get to, past round 6, even quite frankly, into rounds 5, 6, I'm looking for upside. And so I went Jaden Ott and Kobe Pacer with my next 2 picks here. Ott is certainly somebody who impressed as a freshman. A little bit of pause here, not only playing in the Cal offense, but they've added some running backs through the transfer portal. I'm going to go ahead and just lean into Ott's talent and say that, without those transfer portal moves, we might be taking Ott in the 3rd, 4th round. So I'm happy to take him at what I view as a pretty good discount here with just off-season moves. And then Pacer, I think he has the opportunity to be the guy for UNC. I don't think it's locked and loaded by any means, but we saw that late season performance. That was a nice indication of maybe where the coaching staff wants to go this year. So, not having taken wide receivers early, you almost have to lean into that a little bit more here. And then I finished with my tight end. I waited on tight end. I took Jalen Conyers out of Arizona State. Good production here. Quite frankly, he was kind of the best available at the position here. I was the last one to take the tight end. I waited the longest. So, overall, I'm happy with my team. If I was to go back and do this again, I think I would prioritize getting a quarterback in that 1st round. And I really actually wouldn't mind walking away from the first 4 rounds with 3 quarterbacks. If I had done that, I think I would have liked my roster a little bit better. Maybe instead of prioritizing Braylon Allen here as we're trying to figure out that offensive scheme. But working down board, I'm happy with what I got. I would love to have done a full 20-round exercise here to see how I could build out some depth around this team. But, it'll be interesting here picking from the 10 spot. I feel like maybe this class is a little bit friendlier here if you've got a top 5 or 6 pick. So I like the challenge. It was a fun exercise. Overall, happy with my roster.
Thank you very much, Matt. On now is Justin from the CFF Insiders website. You can find him and his work on Twitter at InsiderCFF. Go ahead and take it away, Justin.
What's up, Chasing the Natty Nation? This is Justin with CFF Insiders. It's really good to be back here. I'm glad that Jared invited me back into the way too early mock draft once again. It's nice, having your really early preconceived notions about players validated. And it either shows that you're really ahead of the game or nobody else agrees with you because they're not going to pan out when people pick or do not pick players that you're already high on, despite the fact that it's January. So I'm going to run through a couple of questions that Jared has asked me to answer just about this mock draft that we did. My general opinion of this year's pool of players is that we are pretty well off at some spots, having to rely on potential at some other spots. Tight ends, the big one that we're having to rely on potential for. You've got Brock Bowers and Brant Keithy pretty high up. compared to everybody else. I think there is about 3 tiers in between those two guys and anybody else next. I ended up taking Mitchell Evans at tight end. That's simply because the Notre Dame tight end spot has been known to be pretty trustworthy. We'll see what we look like after the spring with whoever comes in and who stands out. But outside of those two guys at tight end, it's pretty much just a guessing game from there. A couple of guys up top at wide receiver, but after that you're basing everything else just on system because there's so much turnover. Running back's pretty solid. Quarterbacks are pretty good early on. We ended up having 6 quarterbacks taken in the first round, none in the second. And then after that, there was a stretch of quarterbacks where it was a whole lot of potential. The next 3 of the next 4 were Tyler Shuck from Texas Tech, Cade Klubnik from Clemson, and Joe Milton from Tennessee. All 3 of those guys have shown potential in spots, but haven't really gotten the starts, at least at their current location, to really show that they are completely 100% safe picks. So a lot of potential guys there at quarterback as well. Do I like the team that I drafted? I do like my quarterbacks as well as my running backs, but at receiver, it's more just a whole lot of guys with potential, whereas there's not a whole lot of safety. So I got Michael Penix from Washington is a huge one, and then I got Baby Prime at Colorado. I've got a fair amount of trust in both of those guys, even though Shador's moving up to the Power 5. There's only a handful of defenses in the Pac-12 that I'm actually concerned about when it comes to him. And the Sean Lewis guys are usually a gold mine for fantasy production, so I like that one. I like Big Penix energy as well. Will Shipley at Clemson and Remon Davis are about as trustworthy to me as they come. Remon going to Kentucky with Liam Cohen coming back is pretty huge for him. And then Will Shipley's going to be in the Garrett Riley system this year, which should be a little bit more fruitful, and we shouldn't have issues to where he gets either a ton of carries or no carries in the first half, with the inverse happening in the second half. That happened multiple times. I took a lot of potential at wide receiver. I didn't take any of the top guys off the board, just mainly wanted to sit back and see where they went. And so I took a lot of dudes based off pure potential and the system that they're a part of. So Golden at Houston, Voisin at South Alabama, Reggie Brown at James Madison, and Tavian Robinson at Kentucky. I like Robinson's potential with Liam Cohen back. Even Liam Cohen has come out and mentioned in his early pressers that he hated that he didn't get the opportunity to play with him this year, but he's back, and so is Robinson. So that's going to be huge for Kentucky to have both of those guys back in the fold. Something I do differently is there's mainly 2 guys that I wish that I would have taken sooner, and that's Torrey Horton from Colorado State and Derwin Burgess at Georgia Southern. Colorado State's offense was awful, but Torrey Horton somehow managed to be a huge part of that. Georgia Southern's going to be just fine despite the guys leaving. They're going to be okay. Burgess is still going to be that top guy. I wish that I would have capitalized on him sooner. Some players that I'm surprised went undrafted. Not a single Sam Houston or Jacksonville State player went. I've looked, and there's not really a guy that's actually stood out to me as a guy who maybe should go in the first 9 rounds, but they're still new teams. There's usually somebody we're all excited about from teams moving up from the FCS to the FBS. A lot of the guys last year were the James Madison guys. I think Chris Thornton at this point in time was like an 8th round pick, and he worked his way up to like 4th round or something like that. No Malik Hornsby was pretty shocking. Moving from Arkansas to Texas State, I think that there's some players who enter the transfer portal and just, I don't know if they understand college fantasy football, but it seems like they get it. Malik Hornsby is one of those guys going to Texas State, joining the G.J. Keene offense there. That'll be really good for him. Kevin Coleman going to Louisville was one that stood out to me. Was super highly touted going to Jackson State, and then transferred after Dion left for Colorado, and now he's over there with Jeff Brom at Louisville. It was more shocking that he didn't get drafted, mainly because Jamari Thrash also got drafted. And so if we're picking up the transfers from Louisville, I like the potential of Coleman, especially if nobody's going to be picking him. If nobody's going to be picking Kevin Coleman, I will gladly take him and trust the chances of him possibly stepping up in a big way. And there was not a single Purdue wide receiver taken despite Graham Harrell being there. And so that was also kind of surprising. I drafted Tavian Robinson just to get people talking about him. I think he deserves a little bit more recognition right now, given that Liam Cohen's coming back. He recruited him to Kentucky. He stayed at Kentucky after Cohen left. And before he mentioned Key or Brown in his opening presser, he talked about Tavian Robinson. And so that's huge for me. Devin Leary loved throwing to Thayer Thomas in the slot, and that's exactly where Robinson's going to be. Who do I expect to rise and fall in drafts? John Rice Plumlee was a 7th rounder, I believe, in this draft. He finished up as a top 25 fantasy quarterback last year, despite having to fight off Mikey Keene in a couple of games and missing another couple of games due to injury. So he'll probably move his way up. I'm not a big Troy Franklin fan at Oregon, at least not at where he was taken. He was taken as the wide receiver 10 in this draft. Franklin is a sub 1,000-yard receiver from last year. The Will Stein hire certainly gives him a lot of appeal, but Oregon has picked up Tez Johnson from Troy, even though that might not flash on paper. Tez is the adopted brother of Bo Nix and Aiden O'Connell, and Chuck Sizzle just showed us what nepotism can do at Purdue all last year, so that could be something to worry about. They also pick up Trayshawn Holden from Alabama, and so I don't know that I'm comfortable at this point in time picking up a guy like Troy Franklin, especially that early, when I could have picked up a few other players here and there. For example, DeCorian Clark at UTSA is a good one. Jordan Curley at SMU is a good one that I would have taken there. Squirrel White from Tennessee. And Derwin Burgess especially. I think that we all did Derwin Burgess a disservice by not taking him earlier than we did. So those are my thoughts on this year's far too early draft. I can't wait for an awesome offseason. Just speculation just to get back to the greatest sport on earth. Thanks for having me on, Jared. I look forward to working with you a little bit more during the season.
Thank you for your analysis, Justin. Last but certainly not least, we have JD Yonke, CFF analyst over at DevyWatch. You can find him on Twitter at YonkersCFB. Go ahead and finish us strong, Yonke.
Peeps, JD Yonke here, CFF with DevyWatch, here to regale you on my thoughts about the way too early CFF mock draft, hosted by CFF Jared. All right, let's dive into it. What is your general opinion of this year's pool of players? Anything unique compared to previous years? General opinion? No, I wouldn't really say I have a general opinion. A little early. I guess I was glad to be the last pick. I picked 12th. Out of 12, that's last for you folks counting at home. Unless I was top 4. Marvin Harrison at 4 looked pretty good. Judkins, pretty good. Caleb Williams, obviously. I like you. So the top 4 picks, I think, are pretty sweet. I won't complain about a Malachi Corley, but other than that, the first round, I didn't really care that much who I was going to end up with. So getting Blake Corum and Emeka Egbuka, that's who I took. With my first 2 picks, I am very happy with that. So I guess my takeaway is I want to be picking near the end of the draft, maybe, possibly. But I think that's my preference. Normally, in CFF, where there's a deeper pool of players, and yeah, I like picking towards the end usually. So not sure that's unique to this year. Okay, running back, I felt like was the strongest position group, I guess, would be my takeaway. I thought there were some really strong options towards the front of the draft. Like, I really thought about going Blake Corum and Rocket Sanders, my first 2 picks. If I had to do it over, I guess I would do that maybe sometimes. I like having a wide receiver 1 and a running back 1, but I just really like the running backs, and I thought there was some pretty good depth. Jaquindon Jackson, Rodney Hammond, Sai Bangura, Jason McClellan. These guys are going in the 5th round, right? A lot of these guys. So Bucky Irving in the 6th. I just thought there was some really good depth at the running back position. So that was my one takeaway. Of course, we only drafted 9 rounds. So we said there's good depth, in a short draft where people are capped at 3 running backs. So probably was about to dry up right as we stopped, but no way of knowing that. So I guess we'll see. But I do like the first 9 rounds of running backs is what I will say. Other than that, number 2, do you like the team you drafted? I drafted this team, so I would think I would like it. I guess I don't immediately regret any decisions. Again, like I said, I probably would do the Rocket one over, but I thought I ended up with 3 pretty good running backs anyway. So let me talk about my team, I suppose. So at running back, like I said, I got Corum. I got George Halani at the end of the 3rd round, Boise State, the whatever he is, 6th-year senior. And then Samson Evans, running back, Eastern Michigan. So obviously I'm very happy with those running backs. I think they're all going to get over 1,000 yards, and I think they could all get double-digit touchdowns like Evans and Corum will. Health willing, right? And then Halani's just an all-around back. And like I said, that team should win a lot of games and should be in some favorable scenarios. So, and they seem kind of content to keep giving him a big workload. So I'd see that continuing. So I really like running backs. Wide receiver, I got Igbuka and Jacob Cowing. Jacob Cowing got in the 4th round. Love that pick. Personally, that was my favorite one that I made. With him and Igbuka, I think I'm getting 2 solid wide receiver ones that are going to get over 20 fantasy points per game. So I think that was a pretty strong team. Rondé Gadsden was my 3rd wide receiver. I don't know how bad Syracuse is going to be, but he's a stud, so we'll see. And then at quarterback, I waited. There's some really good quarterback depth. There were some guys I was hoping to drop, guys like Jordan Travis, Curtis Rourke, even the Ohio State quarterbacks, if you wanted to snap them 2 up, which you can't really do in a format like this, right? But normally, even Grayson McCall, Jaden DeLora. So I ended up waiting. The guys that fell to me where I liked them were John Reese Plumlee and Dylan Gabriel on the 7-8 flop is where I got those 2 guys. I think just solid prices on those guys. 2 guys who were sexy names last year, and people probably are off them a little bit, especially Gabriel. He was drafted way too highly last year. So looks like some decent value there. So yeah, overall fine team. Number 3, what's something you do differently next time? I wouldn't let Rodney Hammond last until the 5th round. And I wouldn't let LaQuint Allen, running back for Syracuse, last until the 81st pick. That's something I would do different next time. Other than that, which players were you surprised went undrafted through 9 rounds? Harrison Whaley, running back, Wyoming, transferred in from Northern Illinois. Wyoming, I mean, we saw them. They were down to like their, 4th, 5th? I think it was 5th string running backs in the bowl game. Of course, there were some health concerns, but a lot of it was transfer portal. A lot of it's just people are transferring out of Craig Bull's system, which doesn't jive with the new age kids. And when you say his system doesn't jive with new age kids, a lot of times that means hand the ball off to the running back a lot. And that's what it means usually for Bull in Wisconsin. So Whaley should definitely have been drafted in my opinion. Mario Williams, wide receiver for USC, had an up and down year. Okay. USC is going to have a lot of weapons. They did have a few weapons leave, Addison, Kyle Ford, namely. I think there's a chance Mario Williams could be the wide receiver 1 this year. I do think Dorian Singer will be most people's answer. I do think probably will be Dorian Singer, but I don't know I could say that like super confidently. And I could see Williams being a little bit undervalued since he was banged up, and we've seen what he can do, and he's the most familiar with Caleb Williams for an offense that's going to score a lot. I think he should be drafted with the ceiling floor combination you could possibly get there. So those are 2 names that stood out to me. Other than that, I have nothing else to say. Thank you for listening. Glad to be a part of it. Enjoy the rest of the responses.
Thanks again, JD. That's our special. Once again, I want to thank each and every one of the CFF experts who not only participated in this mocks, but also took the time to bring their analysis to this special in order to provide the best experience for all of our viewers. The Twitter handles of each member of this draft will be found below in the description, so please make sure you go and follow each and every one of them. Finally, I want to thank each and every one of our listeners that have watched to this point. You guys are the reason why we can keep doing this stuff, and the growth that you guys have helped create over the last couple of years is the reason why we'll be able to continue doing this stuff in the future. But for now, that wraps up this special. For the experts, for myself, for everyone, I hope you guys have a blessed day, and I'll see you guys next time on Chasing the Natty.